Hello and welcome to this inaugural session of Himalaya Samvad, which is being organized by the Observer Research Foundation. The idea behind this Samvad, which is basically dialogue, is to bring together three countries, India, Nepal, Bhutan. What we have in mind is a broad-based dialogue, a continuing dialogue, and the whole idea was that we are three countries with three peoples, but we also have three shared commonalities. Each one of us has a pretty large, young demography, and largely driven by that young demography, we share soaring ambitions, soaring aspirations, and apart from cultural affinities, we have a third shared commonality, and that is the Himalayas. The majestic Himalayas brings us together. It also links us into one continuing geography. When we were deciding on the name, there was some debate. Should it be Himalaya dialogue or Himalayan dialogue? We settled on Himalaya dialogue because Himalayan connotes a certain amount of impossibility. But we want this dialogue to be a dialogue of all that is possible, all that is doable, and all that can be done by the people together. And the three young demographies, when they come together, a lot can be done. Uh, the first session today is on technology. We are calling it the Digital Himalayas. And the second session is on Green Himalayas. The idea is that technology can not only connect the three nations, but it can also enhance business and cultural ties, and it can take us towards a shared idea, a shared concept, and shared knowledge of a climate resilient Himalayan region through green investments, through green technology. In this session, we will largely talk about the application of technology and how the young perceive, how the young in India, the young in Nepal, the young in Bhutan, how they perceive the application of technology in their lives, in their ideas of business, commerce, and in improving the overall functioning of their society, their economy, and their entire the linkages which this builds. So we'll talk about sharing tech know-how. We'll talk about creating digital business networks. We'll talk about fintech, digital payments. Is it possible to have seamless e-retail between the three countries? How the startups can work together, collaborate together, and how basically we deal with the world that will emerge after the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are looking at the post-pandemic world, we are looking at the post-pandemic region, and we are looking at post-pandemic realities and how best to meet those challenges and convert those challenges into opportunities. And lastly, I would like to point out that we are meeting on the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Uh, the Mahatma, as we all know, stood for peace, equality, freedom. And these three things, peace, equality, and freedom, they can be assured through the correct application of technology, through the correct technology. Of course, technology can be misused, it can be abused for contrary purposes, but I would presume that we all believe, at least the people in these three countries believe, that technology must be harnessed, technology must be created by the people, technology must be created for the people, and technology must be of the people. And the end purpose of that technology should be peace, prosperity, equality, and safeguarding our liberty and freedom. We have roughly 60 minutes, and we begin with two keynote speakers. After that, the other speakers come in. I would request the speakers to limit their comments to about 5 to 6 minutes, so that we are able to squeeze in some question answers at the end of this session. We begin with a keynote by Mr. Biswas Dhakal. He is the founder of eSeva, which is Nepal's digital wallet. That will be followed by a keynote by Ms. Debjani Ghosh. She is president of NASSCOM. And once we are done with two keynotes, we come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, ORF and distinguished panelists and friends. It's exciting to be here to be part of this conversation. What we believe as F1 Soft is a driving technology forward to improve people's life in Nepal. I'm excited because I deeply care about technology and know that Nepal, Bhutan, and India will play a big part in its future. India is our biggest and closest neighbor and showcase tremendous growth in the information technology field. In coming few years, I'm sure the world's most prominent and thriving Silicon Valley will be in India. Indian young entrepreneur will dominate the maximum innovation and youngest billionaire list. Thank you to open digital innovation by India government that has been leveraged by startup community, making India now the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. The majority of world Fortune 500 companies CEO list will flag with skillful and visionary graduates from IIT and IIM, and the days are not too far. Being the closest neighbor, some exclusive rights of refusal reserves Nepal and Bhutan. That may be the mindset of community, but things won't work that way. Nepal needs to claim with a good neighbor for a potential partnership, wherewith capacity can be enhanced. Nepal and Bhutan can't be upset when unable to catch up with our neighbor's growth, who is marching towards technology transformation and human capital development. I see and believe that tri-strategy needs to be deployed to support and uplift or prepare Nepal and Bhutan to mark themselves in the information technology map. Nepal needs to be in dialogue with Indian education system to establish top-class education institutions like IIT and IIM to unleash and to broaden the capacity. Education plays a vital role in uplifting the community level, thought process, innovation, and negotiation skill. Most of Nepalese entrepreneurs struggle to raise funds and cannot stand in a better positions because of skill set. If we start today, we can see the impact in second generation. We're already a generation behind with our neighbor. The fastest transformation of technology will create an enormous gap in the preceding day if we are unable to do so. Inter-country coordination and exchange of strength are vital, which is required to uplift the national economy. Thank you, Amun, Sastodil founder, who stood forefront and partnered with Flipkart to unleash the Indian service and technology for Nepalese people. Sastodil showcased the prospect of partnership and competitive market benefit that Nepalese are enjoying today. Advantage of an open border economy and cross-border transaction prospect. We are partnering with NPCI to bring seamless interoperability between Nepal and India. The inflow and outflow of economy is remarkable. And with the collective effort of PhonePe and NPCI, we can bring ease on Nepal's daily life for money movement. There are equal opportunity for an upcoming and aspiring entrepreneur to license and build synergetic partnership between Nepal and India. Total might be the next business that can potentially establish partnership with Ola, and the outcome will be humongous. With the slogan stress-free ride from Kanyakumari to Himalaya. Nepal needs to seek help to flourish entrepreneurial ecosystem by asking guidance on showcasing the uniqueness of Nepalese entrepreneurial potential and prospect of business available in Nepalese market. Venture fund and incubation center needs to be established with the support and guidance of Indian expert to showcase the idea for upscaling the services. Invention and innovation has been largely responsible for rapid economic growth in developed countries. Nepal needs to learn from Neighbours how one FDI strategy transformed Indian information industry and thus impacted the IT business economically. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Hey, thanks a ton, Kanchan. So, you know, I'm going to talk about what countries can do to create the new normal. The new normal that we all keep talking about is not going to get created by some unknown magical force out there, as we well know. It is going to get created by the actions that we take today. And these actions is going to determine the new leaders in the digital world. So it's extremely important for countries to start thinking about how are they going to use this opportunity to drive the change that they need to. The one thing that is pretty clear about the future is that digital technology is going to be at the center of today's economic development. Um, we have seen this in the last few months of the pandemic. Um, Technology has transcended pretty much every single vertical, be it healthcare, be it education, be it retail. The digital transformation was definitely happening, but in the last 4 or 5 months, the kind of transformation and the pace of digital transformation that we have seen across the world, we have not seen that in the last maybe 5 to 10 years. I mean, we have seen an exponential acceleration in the pace of digital transformation across the world. And it's not just businesses that are responding to it, it is also countries. Countries are responding to it because it gives them an opportunity to completely reinvent the playbook. And why is it so important? It is important because today, if used right, technology can do 4 things for a country. First and foremost, job creation. There's a lot of concern out there that technologies will take away jobs. Yes, in a poorly planned um, economy where the government has not thought through its digital transformation adoption plan, yes, if poorly implemented, technology can absolutely impact jobs. But if implemented right, if planned right, technology will become a net job creator, and it'll be the single largest source of job creation in countries going forward. Second, economic growth, the efficiencies that are caused with the use of technology can give a huge boost to your any country's GDP. I mean, just in India, we have been looking at getting around $1 trillion from the digital economy as a boost to the Indian GDP. Um, and if you just think of AI, which is the prevalent technology today, if India adopts the right plan for AI implementation, the country can benefit anything up to $500 billion from the use of AI by 2025. Yes, even in this crisis mode, AI provides a huge opportunity to the country, but provided we use it right. The third big area where technology is helping right now is COVID-19 response and economic recovery. We've all seen the role of testing technology, from testing to take remote monitoring of patients, remote care of patients. I think technology can provide a especially the data and how we use the data, the analytics, can provide governments with the single biggest ammunition for the management of this pandemic. And last but not the least, supporting social initiatives and equitable growth. I think all companies and countries have to decide, and this is a choice we have to make, have to decide whether their technology implementation is going to be inclusive or not. The choice is ours. And if you decide and if you set the guardrails to drive inclusive use of technology, adoption of technology, technology can then be used to solve some of the biggest social problems, the divide between the haves and have-nots that a country faces. But yes, if not used right, it can absolutely and significantly increase that gap than anything else. And again, technology here is not the magic. It's just a tool. It will do what we tell it to do. So ultimately, it sort of comes down to us, humans. How are we deciding to use the technology? And I'll give you the India example. As I said, there's a potential of around, for us to add around 500 billion to India's GDP by 2025. If we can just get the right plan for implementing AI in India. This is a study that NASSCOM has done with McKinsey, where we've identified as we recover from this pandemic, if we choose to use AI well, what will be the impact and where will be the impact? For example, one of the sectors which is going to contribute significantly to this economic boost is agriculture, consumer goods and retail, banking, insurance, telecom. These are sort of the top sectors where the right use of AI can provide a significant boost to the economy. Now, what does it take? And I think that's what everyone has to think through. If you have to use technology as a net job creator, you need a new playbook. You have to think through the guardrails for using technology. And I think this is very important for our countries, for India and our neighbors, for the Himalayan countries. We are mostly young countries. And if you think of the West, they have an aging population where technology is now playing the role of replacing the workforce that is retiring. I think in our countries, we have exactly the opposite problem. We have an incredibly young population, and technology has to figure out how do they augment the skills and productivity of our workforce rather than replacing the workforce. I mean, just if you take India, we're going to have 90 million people joining the workforce in the next 5 years. We cannot afford technology to take their jobs. We have to ensure that technology creates more jobs for them, and technology also augments their productivity. So the role technology will play for us is going to be very different from the West. And therefore, I strongly believe that Asian countries like ours need a new playbook if we have to change that equation between technology and jobs. And there are 5 things that most countries look at when they're creating that technology playbook. The first thing is data. Even before data, I would say number one is strategy. What is your vision? What is your goal? For example, in India, the vision is very clear that we must have a very inclusive use of technology, which is going to bridge the gap between the haves and the have-nots. So when the vision is set from the top that this is how the country is going to use the technology, it becomes very easy because then you pretty much give that mandate to your companies, to your businesses to say, these are the guardrails and this is how you're going to do it. So having that vision is extremely important. I think the second important part is which are the priority sectors. You can't solve all problems with AI or with technology. You absolutely do not even try it. You have to pick the verticals, you have to pick the problems where you're going to get the maximum impact. And that's the study we have done in India to identify which vertical should be the priority verticals. Second, you have to think through your data strategy. Do you have the right data sets? How good, what is the quality of your data sets? Do you have the right structure? Do you have the right policies in place for the sharing of data? Do you have the right policies in place for the utilization of the data? Do you have the right policies in place to keep data safe for privacy? I think this is where government has to spend a lot of time, because this is sort of at the core of your digital transformation plan, given that data is the fuel that will drive the digital transformation plan. So it's extremely important to have the right policy framework to not just safeguard data, but to ensure that you have the right utilization strategy to get the most out of your data. The third part is, of course, technology stacks. But what we have seen with COVID, the pandemic, is technology is getting democratized much faster than it was getting democratized in the past. So my belief is technology is going to be available to everyone. But what's going to differentiate is the fourth pillar, which is talent. How good is your digital talent? Because ultimately it'll the differentiation will come from the talent, and how your talent is able to use technology to create solutions for your country. It's going to be extremely important for countries to narrow down and focus on talent as pretty much what I say a national priority. It is job one, because if you don't have talent, then nothing else matters. What are your plans for ensuring that you are developing digital talent? In India, thankfully, this has been, not just acknowledged, but I think the government has identified this as a key focus area, and the government is working to create a national digital platform with NASSCOM, which will train around 4 million people in the next few years with the latest digital skills that are so important to give us the digital mastery, that competitive advantage that we need. And the last but not the least, the last pillar is about execution. What is your execution strategy? Do you have a lighthouse strategy? Are there projects that you can start first, like water conservation? But pick some of those big problems where technology can really make a difference, and start with those to build the capabilities, to build the ecosystem, to build the metrics. And yes, metrics are absolutely important for any digital transformation plan. If you do not have metrics, you're not going to know whether your technology is giving you the investment, the returns on the investment that you've made or not. So this is absolutely critical to get done. I strongly believe, and this is something I was reading in a brilliant HBR article recently, that pandemic, the COVID, is one of the biggest accelerators ever for digital transformation. It has pushed all societies, it's also the biggest equalizer, it's the greatest equalizer, because it has pushed all society, irrespective of where you are, which part of the world you are in, how rich or how poor you are. It has pushed every single society to an inflection point where embracing technology was no longer an option, but a necessity. If you needed to keep your businesses running, you had to embrace technology. If you needed to keep learning going in the country, you had to embrace technology. If you needed to continue with healthcare, you had to embrace technology. There was no option. And I think with the right steps, actions, and businesses, governments can absolutely turn this crisis into one of the biggest opportunities ever to build a future and build a competitive position in the future. At the end of it, it all depends on the commitment you have and how fast are you willing to go. I mean, you can do all of this, but your neighboring country does it faster than you, they are going to have a bigger competitive advantage over you. So I think agility is ultimately going to be key in determining the leaders of the new digital world. So I would end here by saying, do not waste time debating anymore whether technology uh, whether you should be embracing technology or not. That train has left the station. It's all about how fast and how well. And what are you going to use it for? It's going to be extremely important to have that vision that this is the role technology is going to play in our country. These are the priorities. And then build to that, have a structured approach, build to that. And prioritize on talent. It's absolutely critical. Without talent, you're not going to get the results. And last but not the least, do not forget that technology, if misused, can cause much greater harm than good. So it all boils down to how we use it. And every country should absolutely have the guardrails for the responsible use of technology or the ethical use of technology. So, with that, I wish you the best of luck, and I'm absolutely happy to have further dialogues as needed. Thank you very much.
Welcome back. So we listened to Mr. Biswas Dhakal, the founder of Seva, Nepal's digital wallet, and Ms. Jani Ghosh, who's president of NASCOM. We now move into the participatory part of this session, and we begin with Mr. Amun Thapa, who's founder of Sasto Deal. So over to Mr. Thapa. Please try and limit your comments to 5 minutes each so that hopefully we'll have some time left at the end of the session for some questions to be taken. Mr. Thapa.
Sure, Kanchan. Hi, Kanchan. I'll just turn up the video so that it's more audible. So my name is Amun. I'm the founder and CEO of Sasto Deal, Nepal's leading local e-commerce company. And so we've been in the industry for the past 9 years. Started as a small startup, and we're now one of the largest homegrown company. Recently, we've just partnered with Flipkart as well in India, and then would love to answer your questions if any, Kanchan.
Mr. Thapa?
Yes, Kanchan. Good.
Yeah. So if you could tell us something about your startup, about the digital wallet, how it works in Nepal, what are the experiences we can learn from?
Right. So, Kanchan, in Nepal, Sasto Deal and e-commerce industry, I'd say we are 6 to 7 years behind than that in India, but it's obviously one of the most fastest growing industries here. Like as a company, we're growing almost 300 to 400% year to year. But in context, in compared to other similar countries, I think Nepal has a lot of catching up to do. In terms of the retail market, it's just like 2%, but it's steadily growing. So when we started back in 2011, the internet penetration in Nepal was just 9%, and today over the years it has come out to be somewhere around 65-70%. So as an entire ecosystem, we've come a long way. But as things are developing very fast, the biggest concern for a local something like us in a country like Nepal is the digital divide. Nepal, those in the urban areas are using e-commerce platforms to scale their businesses, but while those in the rural areas are left way behind. So that is one concern we're trying to address, apart from the core e-commerce activities that we're doing. Secondly, we've also partnered with Nepal government. So we're the sole partner in terms of Nepal government. We have an outlet that provides subsidized essentials for those who cannot afford, right? But the problem is people cannot go to the central officers, especially due to COVID, and those in the rural communities, they don't have any access to these products. Right? So what we've done recently is we're partnered with the government, and then we're delivering essentials all across Nepal as well. And similarly, like what we also do in Nepal, just like in India, we have unique products in each region, like the Himalayas, we have mountain honey, the flat Uttarai land, they have their own unique products. So until now, it's been very difficult for the mass to get those products. So with subsidy on e-commerce, we're trying to bridge that gap so that these unique products are also available in Nepal. And I'll talk more on Flipkart and subsidy cross-border agreement that we recently started going forward. So I'll leave it to other founders to share their stories.
So did the use of digital wallet pick up during the pandemic period? Were more people using it? Did it help you penetrate into rural areas? And do you have any specific plans for the post-pandemic economy of Nepal?
Yes, Kamsan. So Nepal, just like in India, we were in a lockdown, complete lockdown for almost 4 5 months. And because of that, people feared, Nepal was always a cash transaction country, but since the lockdown, people feared dealing with cash, and uh, that gave a sudden rise to e-commerce and especially the digital payment. What we saw on our part was 40% used to be online transaction before COVID, but recently somewhere around 50 to 60%. So that's the difference that we're seeing in terms of digital. And even post-COVID, we see so this number won't go drastically down. I think people are now used to these payments. Now, it's just like how the elder generation are used to online meetings and everything before they had to meet in person. So now people are used to digital payments. They don't like dealing with cash, and that has been a big difference. Now, our the generation is above everyone else as well. So that will drastically change how we do business in Nepal. But still, like I said, the digital divide is still there. There is an impact in urban cities like Kathmandu and Nepal, but people in rural communities they still don't have options. When it comes to technology, they're like far left behind. Even in conferences like this, I'm sure like most of your audience are from urban areas, even in India and Bhutan and Nepal. But the ones in the rural areas are left behind. So I think the digital adoption we'll see in urban areas, but rural areas I think will still take another few years for catching up to do.
Okay, from your learning curve, what is the one key takeaway that would be of interest and importance to both India and Bhutan?
So I think like recently when we partnered with Flipkart, the intention was like Flipkart and India and even Bhutan and other countries would so closely help, but yet unlike the European Union and other countries, wouldn't have like fast trade or something like that. Like, so in Flipkart, they have more than one crore products, millions of sellers, and most of the products are not available in a country like Nepal, right? So now with Flipkart, we've enabled millions of Indian vendors to sell the products easily to Nepal without hassle, without having to worry about customs, transactions, payments, all sorts of government policies and all sorts of hassle, right? So now we're trying to work backwards as well. How do we enable Nepalese products in the Indian market? That small country, the sellers were always limited to a small nation. Now, if we can, expose their products to the Indian market, then there's a billion consumers for Nepali products, which Indian consumers will also love and adore, which is something that was not available or is not available in a country like India. So similar practice we can do it with Bhutan and other countries as well.
Have you been in touch with Indian fintech startups and collaborating with them, working with them?
I've not, but I have frequented in Bangalore and Delhi and Mumbai, and then I've been in touch with a lot of fintech companies there. Recently, I also had a chance to meet someone at Thread, the new startup that's very active in fintech. So in Nepal, there are a lot of fintech companies that's coming up. But we see India as a leader, and there's a lot of learning to do from how Indian fintech startups has evolved over the years. So definitely, our intention would be to have some kind of collaboration in that front. But currently, where we are now.
Thank you, Mr. Thapa. I will now call upon Mr. Sige Dorji, who's the CEO of Thimphu Tech Park Limited. Mr. Dorji, maybe you could tell us about your experiences. What is the Thimphu Tech Park Limited's main remit? How is it bringing technology to Bhutan? And what has been your learning curve?
Thank you, Kanchanda. It is a great honor and privilege for me to have this opportunity to take part in this very important panel discussion organized by ORF. I have been part of Thimphu Tech Park since the launch of the operations. The Tech Park project was started way back in around 2010, and it became operational from the beginning of 2012. I have not been part of the construction team, but I joined it to start the operations. And this Tech Park was started mainly to promote and support the IT industry growth in Bhutan, with the main objective of creating employment opportunities for our youth. From around 2007-8 onwards, the number of graduates coming out from the universities and colleges increased drastically in Bhutan. It is mainly because of the 100% enrollment rate that was achieved sometime in the 1990s. And the government faced a problem of providing jobs to this increasing number of youths finishing colleges or high schools. So it is with that aim that this tech park was started. And given the very nascent stage of the IT industry players, the private players in Bhutan, so one of the objectives of the tech park was to try and get investors from outside, the companies from outside Bhutan to come and set up a branch office here in Bhutan at the tech park. And it was not so easy. So we went through a lot of difficult times, but from around 2015 and 16 onwards, we were able to have a very vibrant ecosystem set up here at the tech park. So at the tech park, we not only provide the office spaces and we facilitate these FDIs to come into Bhutan, but also we have an incubation center. It was the first of its kind in Bhutan. So through the incubation center, we try to promote entrepreneurship and innovation in Bhutan by supporting individuals who are coming with new ideas to set up new kinds of businesses and all that. So Tech Park has played a major role in bringing about this kind of mindset change in Bhutan. And through the process, we have gained a lot from the agencies or the initiatives started elsewhere, and more specifically, I would say India. In order to run the incubation center, so I went on this iTech scholarship to ETI in Ahmedabad in 2012. And there I got a lot of ideas. And one of the things I immediately brought home was the business idea competition. At that point of time in India, a competition by the title of The Power of Ideas had been organized, and that inspired me to conduct the business idea competition of Bhutan. Since 2012, we have been conducting this competition annually, but this year, because of the pandemic, we are not able to conduct it yet. But from 2012 till the 2018 we have conducted every year without fail, and many of the participants of that competition, they have gone on to start their own businesses. So this is a brief background around the tech park. I think I'm meeting up a lot of the time. So I would like to say a few things related directly to this discussion today. So in Bhutan, the government has driven a lot of the initiatives. So most of the initiatives here are government driven. So trying to set up proper infrastructure, and then the government's focus on ICT has a lot of times been on e-government initiatives, improving public service delivery. There was a big project started by the name of G2C project, and this project is still continuing under the Prime Minister's office and things like that. But from today's discussion, I would like to focus on quickly share 3 ideas that could be taken forward. The first one is that I see a lot of need for more sharing of ideas and collaboration between the countries in the region, and now this is happening through the initiative of ORF between India, Nepal and Bhutan. I think it's a great initiative, and these kind of initiatives should continue so that there is more cooperation and then knowledge sharing that can take place among the countries in the region, because the realities on the ground are very similar for us. Rather than trying to learn from developed countries far away, I feel that there's a lot that we can learn from each other in the region. So this kind of initiatives, I feel, can continue even after the pandemic. Maybe have conferences organized in Kathmandu or Delhi or Kolkata, where participants from Bhutan and Nepal all can participate in these kind of forums together. The second one is there is a lot of need to educate the general public about cyber safety. Cyber security is becoming a major concern, and among the young people, a lot of people are going online without much knowledge about how to be safe, take care of oneself while being online. So cyberbullying, I think, is quite common, and many young people don't speak up. So this kind of awareness and how to keep oneself safe online, concerns on cybersecurity, I feel need to be probably we need to do more on that. And last, I feel there is a concern, especially for us in the region, about the digital divide. During this pandemic here in Bhutan, so the government decided to impart lessons for the school children through Google Classroom and things like that online. And the poverty rate in Bhutan is considered to be quite low, but still there are a lot of people who have no access to these technologies or the gadgets through which they can access these online educational platforms or even submit their assignments and things like that. So this digital divide and how we can go with a more inclusive approach when it comes to adopting these technologies, I think is also another concern that we can look at jointly. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any one key takeaway from your own experience till now, from which sort of both Nepal and India could learn from you and your experience?
I feel that India is much advanced in many ways, industry-wise, when it comes to IT, and you have set up a lot of good infrastructure. So I'm not able to really propose anything for India, but I feel that Nepal could benefit if they have some infrastructure like tech park in Kathmandu or elsewhere. I think even without such an infrastructure, the Nepali tech industry is doing well. If there is something like this, I feel that they will leapfrog.
Thank you, sir. We now have Sangeet Jain. She's a junior fellow at ORF and she works on technology. Sangeet, if you could just share your thoughts with us.
Yes, thank you, Kanchanda. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm logging in from Shimla today, so I'm very much a part of this region, and this conversation is a very high stakes one for me. So since we're talking about the post-COVID society and how we should go forward, I think one thing we really need to remember is that our time frame now for reform and for thinking about digital transformation has become much shorter, and the need for reform has become much more urgent, because COVID has sort of accelerated digital transformation across the globe, and our region is at risk of being left behind. So this conversation now is even more important than it ever was before, really. Now, taking from this conversation, e-commerce and e-trade is really a booming sector. It has a lot of potential in the entire region, and it can definitely be one of the sectors for economic recovery for our region. In fact, we need to tap into all the potential that intra-regional trade can offer us. It hasn't really budged in the past few years. We're still at about 5% of total trade, right? For the region, our intra-regional trade is very, very low as compared to other continents. So e-trade is something that can really help circumvent some of the barriers that we face in conducting traditional trade. There's already a lot of informal trade that's happening between our regions. There are just quite a few barriers that we need to circumvent and overcome in order to really push e-trade in the region. And I'd like to talk about some of those barriers. One, as Mr. Dorji mentioned, is that we have a huge digital divide in this region, and that's something which applies to the Indian Himalayan belt as well. Our Himalayan region, I'm from Himachal Pradesh, it's majorly underpenetrated in terms of internet connectivity. We don't have high-speed internet here. That's also a little bit because of the complacency that is set in the region, but also because of the terrain. There are issues with the mountainous terrain, which really impedes our move towards physical connectivity. India has seen that with the BharatNet program that we have initiated. The other issue is really capabilities. We are seeing small firms, we're seeing very little digital adoption in the region. Small firms are being left behind to quite an extent because we just don't have the digital skills to get there, to really leverage the digital opportunities that are coming our way in a very inclusive way. There's still a huge rural-urban divide in India as well, and a gender divide. I think only about 16% of women were using mobile and internet services until last year in India. So these are really shared concerns for our region, the capabilities, the physical connectivity, and we don't have high-speed broadband, so which also limits digital adoption. So these are things we need to work on together, right? Another thing, and I think this is really important, is that we still have a lot of trade facilitation barriers for our region. And some of them are first order issues like very high tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers in the region. Also, some of them have sort of started being resolved, such as the logistics issue. For example, at the Jaigaon port, I think in Bhutan, we used to have a lot of traffic at that land customs clearance border. But now India has sort of opened another road so that traffic has sort of eased. But we still have a lot of issues because since GST has come in, we need to clear a few documents at the border, and that requires high-speed internet again. So that's causing a lot of delay at the border. Also transport, simple things like transport, where we don't allow trucks to cross land borders. So we have to ask them to transload their cargo. But the BBI and motor vehicles agreement is sort of a move towards easing barriers like that. And in that respect, I think we really need to bring Bhutan into the conversation again and start having a more inclusive conversation around this, because the MPA has really been a step forward for us in easing transport barriers. I think also, like Kanchanda, you mentioned in your keynote address, we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So we don't have perfect regulatory frameworks right now in the region. But that doesn't mean we can't go step by step and really move towards that. We still have very high duties for very small value items as well in the region. And we have very high customs barriers. So that really is a huge sort of disincentive for small firms to compete in the market. So if we reduce the duties for trade in the region for low value items and also make the customs clearance process much easier, I think that would be one step towards making e-commerce a much more viable proposition for the region. Also,
Thank you, Sangeet. I'm sorry to cut you short, but we need to wrap up now.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, you need to wrap up now.
Okay, so I just have three key takeaways for this entire conversation. One is the need to work on the digital divide, the physical connectivity and capabilities aspect. The other thing is to work on a unified retail system for our region, a unified regional platform. And I think in order to really get there, we need to let the big firms sort of lead the way. We have a lot to learn from Mr. Aman Thapa's Sasto deal, for example, the way he has really used the platform to sort of understand the local market, to target the local market, bring in local suppliers, really working in a way that does not leave behind some parts of the community. So if we let these big firms sort of who have experience lead the way, who have some form of consumer protection framework, because we don't have that for the region, I think we could really be on our way to building these regulatory frameworks. We just have to start. We have to make a start and then regulation will follow. So that's it.
Thank you, Sangeet. Mr. Shikshit Bhatta, the founder of Tootle. Tootle today, or is it Tootle?
It's Tootle. Our website domain is tootle.today, so most people get mistaken with that, but it's just Tootle.
Just let me read out what somebody has posted on your website. That it's easy, it's fast, it's safe, and effective. Definitely the best way to move around Kathmandu. Drivers are really friendly. So, what prompted you to go ahead and launch something to do with transportation, human transportation, and what were your learning experiences?
Well, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here. And now, if we have to think about Tootle and the way we could connect this story of Tootle with the entire Himalayan story, or Himalaya story for that matter, there are a few narratives that we need to build. And during this course of next 5 to 6 minutes, and I'll just time myself, I'll just try to build that narrative with our story and how we can connect this story to the entire story of this conversation, where we are talking about how we can digitize the entire region and why we need to do that and what are the impediments we have. If that's the right framework I can speak, I can start now.
Please.
So, if you look at cities like Kathmandu or even Kanpur or Lucknow, or even for that matter, Delhi, right? If you were to just look outside from your windows in an afternoon, you'd find that our transportation system or our mobility infrastructure is broken down. To a certain extent, with metros, Delhi has improved a lot. But if you look at the large part of humanity, people in cities like ours do not have freedom of mobility. Right? If I'm talking about a ride sharing, say for example Uber in downtown Manhattan, there you have the public transportation infrastructure. 90% of the people are employed, they have jobs. But if you look at cities like ours, it's not about convenience of transport, it's about enabling people with the freedom of movement. Because in the absence of a good public transportation infrastructure, people do not have freedom of mobility. So a woman at 9 p.m. in the evening will not be able to find a safe ride to go back home, unlike downtown Manhattan, right? So, the entire brand of Tutul was engineered, and the inspiration was drawn from the fact that with the use of technology, we don't only allow people to move from point A to point B, but we enable their freedom of movement. And when that happens, you would learn that freedom of mobility also means freedom of economic opportunities. And with the same platform, you can also leverage a large number of young demography into getting jobs, right? Because if you have a motorcycle, you can have someone at the back and have them move from point A to point B and also make an income. So it was about creating jobs and enabling people with the freedom of movement. And that was the inspiration. But the challenge is, again, I think entrepreneurship is not just about solving a problem. Right? If I were to ask you what problem would Facebook solve, or what problem GeoMeet would solve, or Zoom would solve, it's very difficult to answer that question. But if I were to ask you, what behavior did Facebook change? What behavior did Google's change? Then it's pretty easy. The way we communicate, the way we talk to one another, that behavior had changed in a large number of people. So for us, the biggest challenge was, in a country where people saw certain kind of risk in hitching a ride with someone else's motorcycle, with an unknown. To change that human behavior was a big challenge. That's one part of it. On the mobility side, now, our experiences also show that how much were gender imbalances in mobility. Almost 50% of women are our users every day. So, changing that behavior was a huge challenge. And on this other side, you would also recognize that in countries like ours, we don't have dignity in work like they have in the West. So, a young boy with a motorcycle would be ashamed of giving a ride to someone on a motorcycle because they normally don't want to grow up as a motorcycle taxi driver. And there was a sense of lack of dignity in work. So, creating that dignity in work was another challenge. But our greatest learning, and what we can do for the reason is that we need to recognize the fact, if we're trying to have inroads with digital technology, is that we need to treat people with dignity, right? And that's already been done. I mean, if you see the Facebook app that has been launched by Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg and a poor person in a rural India uses the same app, right? But unfortunately, we tend to feel in our countries that poor people do not need the same user experience that the rich would need. I think creating an unparalleled user experience for everyone and treating everyone with the dignity in terms of using their technology is something that's very important, because rich or the poor, they would need the same dignity, they would need the same brand, and that's very important. And if we talk about how we can do that, or have we already done that, I think our reason has already done that with a quarter of humanity. Think about how Airtel, with the prepaid mobiles, enabled everyone in our region to adopt telecom technologies, right? Enable most of the people to connect. We've already done that. I know TikTok has been banned in India, but look at the power of TikTok, right? It gives an opportunity of expression to a poor couple in one of the rural Indias, and that video is celebrated the same way the videos of Shah Rukh Khan's are celebrated. Don't you think that that's an amazing power that TikTok has given? While we talk about Twitter, which has given power to people who are more informed, who can write and express their views and opinions, like policymakers, TikTok had given that power to a large number of people. So I think, just to wrap it up, the whole concept behind penetrating with the right kind of technology delves around how you see the problem and how you see what behavior you can shift around people. The second thing is how you treat everyone with the same dignity in quality in terms of user experiences. And third thing is how you give the power to everyone in our countries to express themselves and to even solve some grave problems. Yeah, I can stop it here. If you have any questions around, I can take it up.
Yeah, so like I have been asking all the speakers, any one single key takeaway from your own learning curve, which India and Bhutan could benefit from?
Yeah, I think it's not a part of my mobility business. Of course, the problems that we have in Kathmandu would be the same problems that we need to solve in a city like Kanpur. But at the same time, I think the greatest problem that we face today is climate change. A McKinsey report of 2015 shows that there would be a deficit of clean water up to 50% by 2030 in the Gangetic Plains and the plains that we share between all of us, right? And we predominantly a rice and a wheat eating society. We are going to have graver challenges. So how we can come together in terms of uses of technology on maintaining the right kind of supply of water, trying to innovate and invent on agriculture through our common learnings of how the waters are flowing from the Himalayas to the Gangetic Plain. I think there needs to be a larger effort, and I think ORF could have a further consultation as to how we can bring in technology, because we share these plains, and we cannot stand alone in silos between India and Nepal and Bhutan. I think we need to think about this in a collective manner, because we come from a region where a quarter of the humanity lives. And these challenges need to be solved through a bigger collaboration. I think our learnings of how we use technology, or the learnings that we can gather in next few years, should be openly shared, because these challenges are grave, and these would be very important and at the same time very interesting problems that we can collectively solve, because that would be a very important problem we have to solve through entrepreneurship, through right policies, and through continuous innovations and behavior change as well.
Thank you. In fact, we at ORF are currently working on framing a new project around water, and essentially it's about taking potable water to every household, more so in the rural areas. And I guess the next time we meet, we can have water listed as a point of discussion. That was very enlightening. Our last speaker is Mr. Sonam Peldon. He is the founder Code for Bhutan. We would like to learn more from him. And Mr. Peldon.
Hi, Kanchan. Sorry, I am a Miss Sonam Peldon.
I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'm so sorry.
Not at all. Not at all. Sure. So I think I will start off the discussion by just talking about, at least within the context of Bhutan, for many, many years, whenever we think about new innovation or disruption, our physical constraints, being a country in the Himalayas, has always been like the #1 obstruction. So in a way, the geographical disposition of where we are has also been like a microcosm of our own ability and limitations of doing things that are bigger and beyond what our geographical size and our mass actually lets us do. So I think some of the other panelists have talked about how COVID and this pandemic has really catapulted us into the future, and that's been true for us as well. In a lot of ways, the pandemic has enabled people to use digital payments, enable people to go and experience online education. But if you think about it, like a lot of these things are not new. They've been in they've been around for over a decade. And even before all of this started, like I've always been advocating for the fact that for Bhutan in particular, just because of the fact that we are super small, our size entails and dictates that we have to look beyond our borders for bigger opportunities. And a lot of the things that traditional industries or traditional businesses where we were constrained by physical logistics, technology kind of breaks through that. So it helps us move beyond having that being limited within time and space. So although I've been a tech entrepreneur for the last 5-6 years, and my startups are based in Southeast Asia. Starting March of this year, I've been based in Bhutan more because of the COVID travel restrictions, but my day-to-day working and my operations of the company and me dealing with my colleagues who are also scattered all around the world have been going as business as usual. So taking inspiration from that, and also the fact that for many, many years we have been constrained physically, I thought that for Bhutan in particular, we have to look beyond our borders. And if you look at the trends of all the tech unicorns in the world, everyone's going through this trend and this model of being asset light. Nobody owns inventory or nobody buys things anymore. It's all about subscription based. It's all about renting. So I think looking at the advantages of these asset-light business models is super important, especially within the Himalayan context. And I think some of the other panelists also talked about building capability, which is a huge, huge issue in Bhutan as well. I think a lot of the times when we think about technological innovation, we think that just building an app or having a website will enable us to move into that direction, which isn't the case. A lot of the times what we have to do is build the capability from ground up, and that's why I founded Code for Bhutan a year ago, because I saw the need that even though people's daily lives and behaviors were changing, just like the panelists earlier mentioned, we don't necessarily understand how the technology works. So it's important for us to be able to build that foundational capability within our own country, because only we will be able to understand how the user experiences works for us. Because in a lot of the other countries, you will be talking about technological disruption, which is in the form of ride-hailing or food reviews. But within our own context, it has to be a little bit more on the rudimentary necessity side, which is about how to enable online education and how to deliver health to very, very secluded rural areas within our country. So I think having that capability within us is absolutely important. But then not only that, I think because a huge part of what has been uncovered in this pandemic is the fact that a lot of people are losing their jobs. A lot of people are coming back home because of the economic upheaval globally. We won't be able to provide those jobs domestically. I think if we have regional cohesion and collaboration between the three countries, at least within 4 countries like us, which are less than 1 million people, we won't be able to provide the jobs within the country, but maybe if we have the technological capabilities that merges or aligns our logistics, then people will be able to source or look for jobs outside, while at the same time not having that worry or that added cost of moving themselves to a different region. So I'm really looking at enabling technology within Bhutan in those 2 contexts. The first one being increasing and building capability from the ground up, so teaching people skills like programming and digital marketing, where people can offer their services across borders. And then the second thing being enabling or working with policy makers to really bring to their attention this need, the importance of being integrated with the rest of the world, so that we can not only offer our services there, but also take advantages of the open resource and technology that's already out there. So,
thank you. We have a whole lot of questions that have come in. Unfortunately, we do not have the time to take all of them. I will just pick up 2 questions which I thought are of interest. One is from Ayush Srivastava. He wants to know what are the ways for startups to reach the goals we desire. What are the key points we should learn from COVID? Probably I would ask Mr. Sikshit Bhatta to try and answer that question quickly. Mr. Bhatta, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think the things that you need to learn from startup is the resilience. I think startups come up with a lot of challenges and a lot of failures. So learning from your failures and trying to always do things better the next iteration is something that you can learn. You have to dive into a pool to learn swimming. So it's almost like that. My failures and my learnings are different to your learnings and your failures, right? But the second part of the question is very interesting. What can we learn from COVID? I think COVID has been there in 1 year, but the human mind works in a set of defaults. There's a famous book by Cass Sustain and Richard Thaler called The Nudge. You know, we have our set of defaults. And what COVID has done is that it has changed the default. So we think of everything from the default that has changed. But I think this default would only change for 1 or 2 years. And we'll get back to our own normal self. For example, you know, we were not used to wearing masks, but now everyone does because the COVID is on the rise. But once the vaccine are there, we'll go back to our original default of not wearing masks. So I do not think we should be taking COVID from as a point to pivot in a major way, because this is a part of our society that has come up. And I think one of the things that we also need to understand is that COVID has come at a time when the humanity is at its strongest. So it's not like a Spanish pandemic. So I think we should not lose focus. That's the basis of any startup. We should not lose focus, and COVID or no COVID, I think being focused on your vision and goals are very important.
Thank you. Would Mr. Sigadochi like to add his comments?
I'm not really an entrepreneur myself, so I may not be able to give a very insightful comment on that. But I think the key is firstly really the never give up kind of an attitude that you need. So like the previous year 16 mentioned, the resilience. The other thing is really understanding your, I think, market and the customer. And then living up to the customer expectation and being able to capture the market segment that you're going into. I think that's the key. And just would like to add that for Bhutan, the private sector growth has really been a big problem, mainly because of the small market, as my colleague Sonam mentioned earlier. Just that much for now.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for joining in today for this inaugural session of Himalaya Samvad. As I said, that this is not a one-off discussion. It's a part of a planned series of discussions over a period of time. And unfortunately, because of the prevailing situation, we had to kick off with a digital conversation, and hopefully the situation will ease and we will get to meet either in Kathmandu or in Thimphu or in India at an appropriate place to carry forward this conversation. I was just making notes, and some very good ideas have come up during today's conversation on what could be, what could form part of our discussion the next time we meet. And if you have any suggestions to add, please feel free to write in. And thank you once again for your time, for your thoughts, and for making this Samvad possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So a warm welcome to all of you for joining this session on the Green Himalaya, which is part of Observer Research Foundation's effort to create Mountain Samvad, Himalayan Samvad. I'm Vikram Mathur. I'm a senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Before we go on to our keynote speech from Mr. Sonam P. Wangdi, Member Secretary, National Environmental Commission, Royal Government of Bhutan, and chair of the Least Developed Countries Group at the UN Climate Change Negotiations, I just want to take 2 minutes to kind of frame the 1 hour that we are going to be together. The Himalayan region, with its shared identity, culture, and language, is increasingly under threat. It's under threat from global environmental change, in particular climate change, but also more localized pressures of development and urbanization. The panel today will explore the challenges of preserving the fragile ecologies in the Himalayan region and the livelihoods and cultures that depend on them in the face of climate change and unsustainable patterns of growth. How can we forge a regional identity? What forms of connectivity, what forms of dialogue, what forms of platforms are needed to create a common Himalayan identity to address some of these emerging challenges? We are going to look at both community-led initiatives and grassroots activities, but also policy efforts that transcend borders and regional boundaries. So both the local, the regional, and the global is going to play out in the conversations today. Can we shape a regional response, learning and sharing of knowledge, technology, and models of investment that are common to the region? And what sort of financing needs will be there for this sort of effort, right? Can we form some form of a new Green Deal, even as the region looks at recovering from the impacts of the pandemic? What could be the relevance of this Green New Deal for the Himalayan region? So thank you again, thank you everybody for joining, and I'm going to now request our keynote speaker, Sonam P. Wangdi, to take the floor.
Honorable Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to be here at the opening of the virtual dialogue on Green Himalayas between the neighbors of Bhutan, India, and Nepal. At the outset, let me thank the organizer, Observer Research Foundation, for providing this platform for our academics, government officials, political leaders, professionals, individuals, civil society organizations, and many more to explore ideas that are of mutual interest for collaboration to work towards climate resilient, green Himalayan region through green investment and green technology. The climate resilient green Himalayas is a critical milestone for all of us to strive to achieve. The Himalayas is the womb of our civilization and source of our life and livelihoods for all of us here in South Asia. We must come together more than ever as impacts of climate change are not constrained on political boundaries, and we are all facing unprecedented challenges both from essential climate change and COVID-19 pandemic. On the climate front, the science is robust and clear. It tells us that to achieve the Paris Agreement goal of limiting the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, for which global emissions need to be halved by 2030, and the world must achieve net zero emissions by 2050. But currently, we are not on track. In fact, we are grossly off track with current policies heading towards warming of 3 degrees Celsius or more by end of this century. The assessment carried out by the IC mode also tells us that the Hindu Kush Himalayan glaciers will melt by 1/3, even if the global temperature rise is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And in such scenario, the warming will likely be at least 0.3 degrees Celsius higher in Hindu Kush Himalaya and at least 0.7 degree higher in the Northeast Himalaya and Karakoram. The report on inventory of glaciers from the region shows that many of these glaciers are considered large enough to cause serious damages downstream once they burst out. This means millions of our people who rely on these glaciers for drinking water, sanitation, agriculture, and hydroelectric power will be exposed to climate-induced calamities such as floods, landslides, droughts, heat waves, tropical cyclones, irreversible biodiversity loss, and many more. Already, even just 1 degree of warming, the impacts are devastating. This year alone, across the region, we were grappling with unusually heavy monsoon rains, the worst seen in decades. Weeks of downpours caused flooding and landslide in our countries, killing people and affecting lives and livelihoods. Bhutan lost 4 soldiers while rescuing villagers trapped in a flood. As the most vulnerable community to impact of climate change, we are hardest hit. Climate change and biodiversity are intricately connected with climate change, becoming an increasingly important driver of biodiversity loss. Our farming population and community close to nature have low capacity to adapting and building resilient to such impacts. Further, this year is proving to be even more difficult as the essential climate change is further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Countless lives and livelihoods have been affected. Millions have lost jobs and economies have come to a standstill. The major source of revenue generation from tourism and remittances have been hardest hit by the pandemic and will continue to suffer in the days ahead. COVID-19 pandemic has become a threat multiplier to climate change. I would like to send my prayers and sympathies to all those who have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had good lessons from COVID-19 pandemic that business as usual is not working and there is tremendous window of opportunity for transformative green recoveries to build back better, to deliver stronger climate, sustainability, health, and economic outcomes. Digitization and innovative technologies have a major role to play for greening the socio-economic development of our countries. For now, what we need is a green recovery economic stimulus packages to address both health and climate risks by adopting clear science-based pathways to reach net zero emissions by 2050 that deliver better outcomes both for economies and the environment. But we know that we cannot address them in silos. We all must work together and find common solutions as we are all interconnected and one cannot be achieved without the other. Solutions that are nature-based and green while enhancing resilience to climate change should be our end objective. This will ensure that the impacts are far-reaching and the solutions will be all-encompassing. Reaching a consensus towards a green Himalayas is an opportunity to lead us towards this vision. Therefore, I wish you all fruitful discussions in exploring innovative areas of collaboration for mutual benefit to pursue the goal of climate resilient green Himalayas. Thank you and Tashi Delek.
So thank you very much, Mr. Wangdi, for your excellent interventions and your excellent keynote speech. I think with that, I would like to move on to the conversation, and we have an excellent panel. Rather than introduce the panel at the very beginning, I thought what I might do is introduce the panel as I first pose a question to them. We have 45 minutes, and the format that I'm going to follow is I'm going to pose a question to each of the panelists and give them about 4 to 5 minutes to respond, 5 to 6 minutes perhaps, and then I'm going to have a second round of Q&A based on their responses. The audience can put their questions in the message box on the screen, and my colleagues who are managing this workshop are going to collate your questions and share them with me, so I can then kind of club them and choose how to pose them to everybody. As I've already said, that the context really here is to think about the impact of climate change and also local pressures on the fragile ecologies of the Himalayan region, and think through what kind of initiatives, efforts, and policies are needed to build consensus for regional action. I think my first question I want to pose to Santosh Nepal. Santosh Nepal is a water and climate change specialist and lead of the Climate Change and Hydrology Group at ICIMO, the Integrated Institute for Mountain Development. Is that how can we tap into the knowledge of the grassroots? How can we tap into the knowledge of communities to protect these ecologies, and what are the kinds of climate impacts that you're seeing in the region that region and the areas you work in, and what sort of responses are emerging, particularly those led by communities? Santosh, over to you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, much better. And I apologize to everybody with the technical issues. You always face them in these seminars, so please bear with us. But we have a team working in the background resolving them as they come up. Santosh, yes, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be part of this eminent panel. And I would also like to welcome everyone who has joined from the this virtual environment. The question that Vikram has posed is very important because as we already hear in the from the the keynote, that the climate change is already happening. It's affecting different sectors, including ecology, water resources, across the scales from watershed to river basins. Climate change is in fact creating the tremendous pressure on the different socio-ecological functions. The recent report from the HKH assessment report published by ICIMO in 2019 all indicates that the strong climate change signals an impact on ecological, socio-economic aspects of the Himalayan countries. If you look at the climate change patterns in Nepal, in last 45 years, the maximum temperature has increased by more than 2.5 degrees Celsius. Similarly, future climate change scenarios are also very scary. The average temperature might increase by 1.7 to 3.6 degrees Celsius in moderate to extreme scenarios by the end of the century. Precipitation could increase by up to 23%, but pre-monsoon precipitation could decrease. And what does it mean for different sectors such as agriculture, disaster, health, and water resources? In the Himalayan region in the future, even if the global warming is kept to 1.5 degrees Celsius, warming in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region will likely to be at least 0.3 degrees Celsius higher. And in Northwest Himalaya and Karakoram, at least 0.7 degrees Celsius. You can imagine the pressure on the natural systems because of the changes. For the past 5 to 6 decades, the HKs have shown a rising trends of extreme warm, extreme events, falling trends of extreme cold events, and we have already seen so many extreme events in the recent years, including this present monsoon event, which is very, very unusual. So all the changes are already creating a lot of impacts in our the systems. Like in the keynote, we have already heard that 1/3 of the Himalayan glaciers will be gone by 2100, despite the government actions at reducing the carbon emissions. If no measures are taken, if the business as usual continues, 2/3 of the glaciers will be gone. And because of the changes, there is a high risk, both in the upstream areas and the downstream nations, There is in the upstream nation, there is a high risk of glacial lake outburst floods. Water regime will be shifting. There might be more floods, more droughts. There might be impact on agriculture because of the droughts and changing hydrological and water availability. So there is a lot of other different sectors from biodiversity to ecosystems, all will be impacted. There is a recent report from the Global Report on Internal Displacement published this year. 25 million displaced by disaster globally. And among them, India, China, Bangladesh are among the top countries in our region. South Asian regions, 38% of the global IDPs, internally displaced people. So all these systems will create problems, but we have to. The question is what we can be done together. And then, like Bikram has already indicated, that there are different, the local knowledge, there is traditional knowledge, there are different sort of scientific efforts are going on, and we need to collaborate on that front. I'll stop here, Bikram, and I'll come back again. Thank you.
Okay, excellent for that sort of concise framing conversation. I want to at this point bring in Tashi Dorjiji, and I want to pose you the question: is can we around kind of sustainable livelihoods and the impact of climate change, but also other more localized drivers of change on Himalayan livelihoods, especially livelihoods that depend on ecosystem services. So Tashi Dorjiji is a senior ecosystem specialist at ICIMOD, and Tashi joined ICIMOD as a livelihood specialist and was involved in developing livelihood frameworks, identifying innovative livelihood options and value chains, including responsible tourism and natural resource management in the transboundary landscape of Hindu Kush Himalaya. And now he has the position of the senior ecosystem specialist at ICIMOD. So Tashi, to you, my question on sustainable livelihoods that depend on these ecosystem services, and what is the optimum use of tradition and technology, in kind of managing these livelihoods, particularly efforts to promote climate smart agriculture. So if you could speak to that question, I would really appreciate it. So.
Thank you, Bikramji, and good evening. Greetings to everyone. Bikram, can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, Bikram, I also work in ICIMOD as you have introduced, and my background is mainly I come from a community perspective, so I've spent most of my life working around the communities and livelihoods. So I think I will straight away go and talk about few things that may be relevant to our discussion. I prefer more about the practical aspects, and not really so much on the theoretical and concepts point of view. My work has been around the transboundary landscapes and how important is the transboundary cooperation, to really achieve sustainable livelihoods. And when you talk about the impact of climate change on livelihoods, I think it's very, very clear. There are a lot of drivers of change which has been already highlighted by the keynote speakers and also by my colleague Santosh. Climate change is being one. But more than that is also the socio-economic changes. Now, if you look at our Himalayan nations in the rural areas, if you visit the villages, whom do you find? You don't really find many of the capable young boys and girls, or men or women. I think they've started to migrate out, and what we find is only old and elderly. So that itself is one change. Of course, the recent COVID has tried to reverse the situation, but that may not be a permanent phenomenon as well. So labor, I think, has become a big key issue. And another very important thing, my colleague Chimi might also bring that later on, is the issue of human-wildlife conflict. This is so touching, you see. We have the limited parcel of land across the Himalayas. We cannot compare that. We are talking about mountains, so we are not talking about plains here. And when you talk about mountains, the land parcel is so fragmented, it's small. And that's also sometimes in the middle of the forest. And then our conservation sometimes are so strong that we really value protection of nature and biodiversity that sometimes we overlook the requirement of the community livelihoods, as much as the policy says balanced conservation and development, but then on the ground what happens is, because of so many issues, conservation sometimes, takes the upper hand in some countries and not everywhere. So the issue of human-wildlife conflict becomes very, very prominent, and our colleagues, our farming communities, they work very hard during the season. And then when it is about to harvest, it's just harvested by the wild pest. It's not to blame one another, but we need to strike a balance. So these are some issues. Now, water has become a very, very stressful. See, I think Santosh ji has mentioned, for agriculture, for livelihoods, water is so critical. And in many places, irrigation and is poorly developed, although a lot of efforts are being made. But more than that is the dependency on the rain-fed, rain-feds. And then also when it comes to rain-fed, you don't, because of climate change, you don't get the rain that is required. And when we don't require, we get very, very heavy rainfall, and all the crops are being damaged. And springs are drying everywhere. I think some of my colleagues might bring that. And many of the agriculture or even drinking water, they are dependent on springs. And then if you look at the recent reports, springs are drying everywhere. So these are some of the, major things happening, you see. And also, for being the mountain communities, sometimes, not sometimes, I think most of the cases, you're so far away from the market, and the market linkages and the technologies that is applicable in the downstreams are not necessarily applicable in the upstream, and not able to reach out to many of the communities in the mountains. And these are some of the issues that I think is quite clear, and I think most of us know. So what next then? In the context of green Himalayas, greening the Himalayas, I can just pick up, there's so many topics to be covered, but let me just pick up two or three things. So as we move forward, what I feel important is, I think the nature-based solutions will become very, very important post-2020. And when you talk of nature-based solutions, it will be context-specific, but in the larger context of the Himalayas, I feel all the Himalayan nations are looking forward to more natural, more organic, going more organic production. And this itself has a lot of experiences in the region, and I think we need to bring our experiences together. Because in the post-COVID situation, if you want to talk of green recovery, I guess this issue of food, water, energy nexus becomes important. And in terms of food, I really wish to talk about the organic agriculture, because our Himalayan nations are coming forward to invest more into this. It just needs more support from the development organizations. Number two, we can talk about innovative livelihood options such as ecotourism. I think we are known, as you have clearly mentioned, we are a living heritage. I think a lot of cultures, natural resources, assets, and ecotourism is flourishing well, but this recent COVID has disrupted. But having said that, I think we have to, it will bounce back, it has to bounce back. And then in our own institution, what we are really doing is trying to promote these ecotourism circuits at the transboundary landscape. I see that as a very important, livelihood options as we move forward. Then you see some of very niche commodities. We are in the mountains, and we have to really bank on our niche products. That is one of the, mountain specificities, as it has been highlighted during in one of our ECMOD strategic papers. We have to really make use of our mountain as a mountain resources as differently to that of other areas. And when you talk of mountain niche, you can really talk about very, very high value commodities. Sometimes there are a lot of debates around. The volume is not enough, it's not marketable, so therefore it's not economical. I think we need to debate around this. I think this narrative probably should not hold good, because the very essence of mountain niche will be lost if you just talk around the scales. So commodities such as cardamom, for instance, if countries work together, we can really make a huge impact. For instance, the large black cardamom around, which is habitat to Kanchenjunga landscape, parts of Nepal, India, and Bhutan. This has a serious marketing issue because we don't work together. I think the advantage is being taken by middlemen. But if these three countries work together, if we're able to brand this large cardamom, as a regional niche, probably there's a very good, it's going to be a very good marketable product and going to bring a lot of gains from that. Another thing which I'm very fond of, Vikram, if you allow me, is this the yak as a Himalayan identity. I personally work around yak. Now everybody want to use this terminology yak. A lot of business houses is being used as a promotional program across many of our nations, but not much of investment goes back to yak. And yak is almost identity of our Himalayas. So what we really need at this point is give more voice to the communities like yak herding communities or the livestock herder societies. So at the transboundary scale, from ECMOD side, we are now into forming community networks, local institutions, building their capacity across the borders, and with the objective that at the end of the day we will be able to form Hindu Kush Himalayas Yak Network, so that they get the required voice, attention, and will be able to stand on their own for attracting greater investments. So I think at this stage I will not talk energy. I will not talk of the renewable energy that will take a long time. Let me stop here, Vikram, at this moment.
So, Tashiji, thank you so much for that intervention. I thought you covered all the scales from transboundary to the local really well, and we are going to come back to you. I kind of wanted to bring in my own, obviously Observer Research Foundation does works at a more kind of policy and regional level, and this kind of place-based knowledge and is something that is really important for us to bring into our conversation. So I would like to bring in my colleague from ORF to respond in some sense to some of the things the two speakers have said, particularly some of the ideas that Tashi has put on the table, and think a little bit about how do you build resilience and kind of capacity to adapt, cope, and sustain existing livelihoods, but also discover new forms of livelihoods at the more regional scale, right? I mean, and I take this point about kind of the degree of outmigration is sometimes really quite depressing, and one would imagine that if there was a way to keep the youth in the region to in some sense be part of the change that's needed, that'd be some way to think through some of these issues. Over to you, Aparna. Aparna Roy is an associate fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, and she leads the pillar on climate change at Observer Research Foundation Center for New Economic Diplomacy. The Center of New Economic Diplomacy is in some sense a platform that looks at diplomacy through development cooperation, through cooperation on SDGs in our neighborhood. So that's the main focus, and she leads the climate change pillar there and does some really exciting work on adaptation and resilience. So over to you, Aparna.
Yeah. Thank you, Vikram, and thank you. This is a great panel. Thank you, Santosh ji, and thank you, Tashi ji, for explaining the climate impact on the Himalayas so well. So I won't again delve into the Hindu Kush Himalaya assessment report, which I think Santosh ji has very nicely explained and explained in a very comprehensive fashion. But I'll definitely want to take this point and build on it, which kind of says that the Hindu Kush Himalaya region is warming faster than the global average, as he has mentioned, and it would and the most alarming revelation is that it would continue to unfortunately warm through this century, even if the world is able to limit the global warming at the agreed 1.5 degrees Celsius, and that's what the assessment report lays out. Now, given a fragile ecosystem we are talking about, and given given the kind of vulnerabilities that it's faced with, how can probably the region and the three countries in question right now can build resilience, or what are the key elements or key framework through which, or the tools, if I may say, through which greater resilience can be built? So where does the first opportunities for cooperation to build resilience lies? And I think in a lot of secondary research, even ICMOD has reiterated this framework several times in their different reports, and different resources, but I'll want to kind of, delve in these three. So the first opportunity that I see is opportunity to cooperate for exchange of data and information. I think data and information are very critical tool for informed decision making for resilience building, whether it's the region, whether national as well as the local level. It's very important to communicate the uncertain risk to the decision makers to enhance preparedness always. And given how the Hindu Kush Himalaya region is the hotspot for climate, hydrometeorological, and geophysical hazard, I think enhancing regional cooperation for developing a strong knowledge base on extreme weather events is extremely crucial to building resilience in the fragile ecosystem. Mapping of hazards for communities and real-time information system can substantially reduce vulnerability to any potential hazard through early warning systems and enhancing prudent land use planning. I think between the countries, a broad range of environmental and social data and information could be shared to promote transboundary cooperation for better planning and management of climate risk and to address climate change. This would not only build trust and confidence among the countries, but also provide a common understanding of the issue. This could ultimately result in strong agreements and improved transboundary cooperation. While there have been some progress in this, which has been, some progress in the World Meteorological Organization's WICOS framework that India, Bhutan, Nepal, all the three countries have implemented and are sharing real-time data for flood risk reduction, we need to actually scale these sort of systems up. I think the second point would be investments in resilient infrastructure building. I think given, again, how fragile and vulnerable the region is, it's very, very important to create climate resilient infrastructure, such as hospitals, healthcare services, school building that can be used as community shelter once an extreme event strikes. Similar regional investments in road networks for access to settlement, last mile connectivity, communication systems for information flow may also be necessary to ensure building of resilience. Critical infrastructure such as water supply system and electric power plant also should be made climate resilient, and the region can actually benefit by developing and improving common standard, building bylaws for rebuilding such structures. And the third one and the last one that I would like to emphasize is strengthening of institutions. I think there has to be a roadmap for this, but I'll go back to the Shendai framework for disaster management, which explicitly mentioned the need to develop institutions to promote transboundary cooperation to enable policy and planning for implementation of ecosystem-based approaches, which is particularly of relevance in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. Transboundary cooperation can be enhanced at the national and local level, either between two countries bilaterally or more in the region for strengthening of institutions. I think there is a need to promote mechanisms as laid out again in the Shendai framework for disaster risk transfer, risk sharing, retention, and financial protection to reduce the impact of any climate-induced hazard and disaster. So we need to align and invest resources in capacity building for all formal and informal institutions, and appropriate policies and mechanisms would also need to be developed for supportive interfaces between institutions at both national and local level. Institutional agreements that is supported by communications technology and a clear message content must be developed for end-to-end communication up to the last mile. For example, the ability to send alerts for example, flood warning or release measure after an extreme event is going to be extremely critical. Yeah, Vikram.
Okay, Aparna, thank you so much for that. So that's a lot of work to do and a big and a pretty intense agenda. I do think that you focused quite a bit on knowledge and early warning systems linked to the knowledge and institutions. But yeah, a very comprehensive set of ideas there. I kind of want to move the conversation a little bit further, and I want, in some sense, maybe I'm going to go to Chimi for this next question. But I want in some sense to Chimi to help us think through a little bit about the question of building regional consensus, particularly building a green regional consensus, and especially in light of kind of the conversations that we are having now, both nationally and regionally, about investments in a Green Deal. Chimi, what do you think are the prospects for building this green consensus? And obviously, let me first formally introduce Chimi. Chimi Dorji is the founder of the Chimi D Consulting. He works on energy, green energy and water issues, and he has more than 14 years of experience, of which 10 years is in the civil service of Bhutan, working for the erstwhile Department of Energy and Department of Hydromet Services, and also the Ministry of Economic Affairs. So I think you have enough kind of regional experience and experience of cooperation to help us think through how do you build consensus on an agenda and set of issues which are both really local but also have very strong regional dimensions. Chimi, over to you.
Thank you, Vikramji. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on this panel discussion and talking about this very important issue of the Green Himalayas. And I would like to again join the earlier speakers, thanking the organizers for the organizing this, and to dive into the question about trying to look at green investments in the sector, and also more so in terms of how can we build up regional and national cooperation in terms of trying to look at being, as the earlier speakers, both Tashi sir and Aparnaji and others mentioned, trying to look at how can we make the region more, we are already unique, and how can we take that uniqueness, looking at the strengths that we have, whether it's trying to promote yak traditions, as Tashiji mentioned, and at the same time making ourselves more climate resilient with regional collaborations, as Aparnaji mentioned, in terms of initiatives through the WMO and others. But when it comes to the actual collaboration, one of the main issues that I see, point number one, how are we looking at the really local issues? Whether we are doing a big climate assessment, now Santoshji and others also mentioned about, for instance, the HK assessment. And then at national level, we do multiple numbers of assessments and studies and research publications. But one main issue that I see is how much of is it actually relevant to the men and women in our villages on the Himalayas? When we are doing climate assessments, when we are doing big economic modeling, I have to admit, I am also very much involved in the field, but are we looking at the real needs, the real issues that our people have? If they have some issues with water supply, the water supply for a village A is different from village B, and it is completely different from district in another region. So what kind of systems are we putting in place so that we are able to take into consideration of the local needs? And that's where, as mentioned by earlier speakers, again, where we can talk about regional data sharing, and both at the national level, within the districts, within countries, and at the regional scale, so that we are able to come up with good decision making to ensure that we can have good regional and international collaborations. And because of the fact that we can have collaborations, if we understand the ground reality and what we are discussing makes sense at the ground level. The other issue is on how are we involving the private sector, both in terms of the studies and also on the initiatives that we are taking. And whether we are talking about green financing for environmentally friendly projects or investments in the environment sector or in the green sector, how are we involving the private sector. And because in many cases, based on the studies and experiences that we have in Bhutan, for instance, we see that most of our green projects to come about to a green deal, whether we are talking about the cardamom project or the small water supply project or the big or the waste entrepreneur, the issue is all these projects are small, isolated, and usually with a very, very poor rate of return. So the issue is we have to support the private sector. And when we are doing assessments and analysis, we'll have to look at them in more in depth so that we are bringing all parties on board. The other one is also on the need to look at how can we make sure that the projects are relevant and contextualized, involving the green requirements in projects. For instance, in many South Asian countries like Bhutan or Nepal or even India, for that matter, the economic sector is more or less driven by banks. Banks do not look at whether the project has a strong environmental focus or not, to a large extent, again, not everywhere, but to a large extent. And our economy is dependent on the banks. So how do we bring the banks, not the private sector, but the banks, which are the major corporations, on board when we are making this kind of environmental planning and decisions? So these are the two drive home messages and issues that I believe we should look into when we are talking about the green investments and trying to look at regional collaboration and international collaborations.
Jimmy, really, thank you very much for that intervention. I'm going to come back to you with some more questions a bit later, but I do want to at this stage bring in Pasang Dolma Sherpa. She's the director of the Center for Indigenous Peoples Research and Development and has worked extensively on Indigenous peoples' customary practices and traditional knowledge in relation to issues of conservation, development, and sustainability. She's co-chair of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform under the UN Framework for Climate Change. Pasang, my question to you really would be, how do you, in these kind of larger voices around Green Deal and Himalayan and investments in Himalayan development, how do you sustain the voices of the somewhat more marginal communities that you represent in your research and in your institutional affiliations? Seriously, I mean, what would be the features of a Green Deal so it is actually, in some sense, aligns with issues around the rights and practices of the indigenous communities in the region? Pasang, over to you. I think you have to unmute yourself. Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for the question. It's my great pleasure to be part of the panel with all the speakers. And thank you, organizer, for inviting me to join this discussions. And it's my great pleasure. As you have already introduced me, I have been working with indigenous peoples communities in the Nepal, but also in Asia, and also working in different regions across the globe. So while working with indigenous peoples and also the local communities and also the women's and also marginalized communities, especially understanding their role and contribution for sustainable management of the resources, and how they have been contributing for biodiversity conservation and also for sustaining the ecosystem of the whole regions of the and beyond the boundaries. So as you are aware of, the less than 5% of the indigenous peoples population in the whole world have been contributing for more than 80% of the world biodiversity. And also, the traditional values and our local culture has been the basis for the sustainable genetic resources, ecosystem, and biodiversity. I respect the older panels. Tasiji has already reflected very well that on the need of looking into ground, and I also, echoed by Chimiji also how it's important to understand the ground reality. So the different, and also the other, other speaker also highlighted that need of the resilience, which I fully agree with you. However, we also need to be bear in mind that, Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change report continuously showing since 2007, 2012, 14, and coming up the new reports also that contribution of indigenous knowledge and cultural practices in fact contributed for climate change adaptation and mitigation. So considering this one, but also at the same time having the outcome of the different research and reports, how indigenous peoples and local communities have been contributing for climate change resilience. So that has been actually one of the reasons why the struggle of indigenous people since 1992 of the when the with the Rio de Janeiro's convention on the environment sectors, and after recent COP in Madrid, in the span of 25 years, first time the UNFCCC realized that without indigenous people's knowledge and local values, we cannot deal with climate change. We cannot move ahead. The science, technology, Western values will not is enough. Even the IPCC, as a co-chair, I have had several meetings with the IPCC team that they also have realized, and now recently, me as a co-chair with the local communities and indigenous people platform, we have already had an agreement with the IPCC that indigenous knowledge holders, indigenous peoples leaders, indigenous peoples experiences and stories is the must to be incorporated in the science study of the IPCC to deal with the global issues and concerns of the climate change. So this has already been started, even it's been a bit delayed. So, Nepal is, as Santosh and also Aparna has mentioned already, how vulnerable countries like our South Asia is. Nepal as a fourth vulnerable country to the impacts of climate change, especially in the Himalayan, 18 indigenous peoples who live in there. Majority of the peoples are indigenous communities. Like out of 59 indigenous groups in Nepal, 18 of them are living there. 80% of the populations are living in the Himalayan. But they are the ones who are front to the climate change impacts. There are different researches been done, but it's more kind of like from the more kind of technical aspects, and more kind of influence from the modern knowledge or Western values. That has less given the importance of the local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, how they have been contributing for generation for climate change resilience, climate change adaptation and mitigation, and that has been less reflected in our science-based kind of study. In the name of resilience, now technology is only not enough. Unless and until it is important, unless and until we go to hear the unheard voice of indigenous people whose cultural practices, traditional knowledge, customary institution that has contributed for the world's remaining hotspots, of the biodiversity ecosystem need to be heard now. This is the time that need to be balanced, the science knowledge and the indigenous knowledge on the same level. In the absence of that, the biodiversity hotspots that has been kept in the mountains, ecosystem will be disappear in no way. Especially in Nepal after 1950s, in the name of modern education, in the name of the national park conservations, that has been actually, become the main reason for deviating, disconnecting indigenous people for continuation of the traditional knowledge and value system. And that has been actually the consequence of today, consequence of fragile ecologies and the turmoil of this situation we are facing now. If we have not had that one, if we have heard the voice of indigenous people, the voice of the local communities on the ground, and recognizing their customary governance system, their traditional knowledge, perhaps the situation that we are facing now would not be there, and the continuation of our this traditional values will be continued. The other earlier speakers reflected that now our village is getting empty. Our developing countries, like even the city from Kathmandu, they dream for going to Western countries. Even same, I'm sure in India and Bhutan is the same. All would like young children, if you ask them, what would you like to do? We would like to go to America, Australia, or Canada. Why? Because we are giving less value of our own values. We are really giving less values to our own our skill, our spiritual, our cultural, our traditional, all everything that rooted on the ground is disconnected because of our education system, because of our way of the technology or way of research that really undermine the real wealth of the knowledge. The concept of we have so much knowledge, but we have been undermining, and that has been one of the reasons of creating whole this kind of the situation we have been facing. I think I'll just stop now, and then maybe I can catch up the other things here.
So thank you very much for that. Really, kind of passionate intervention. Thank you so much for that. I mean, I really enjoy that. I know that there's a time constraint. You have to leave us quite soon. So I'm just going to kind of quickly first start with my follow-up question. I might kind of just start with you first. And I think the issue that you are kind of touching, which to me is very interesting and very important, is the issue of knowledge and what is the basis of the knowledge and assessment that is used for kind of the development and sustainability decisions in the region. And at the one scale, we have global assessments or regional assessments, but the other scale, we also have local knowledge systems that are not necessarily always compatible. There is a kind of power hierarchy and power dynamics. I mean, how does one deal with that at a regional scale? Is it even possible to think about it in ways that can support a kind of regional identity, which is based on the culture, language, and traditions? What is the way to align these two ways of thinking and working almost? I don't know if my question is clear, but
yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think if I understand your question, how can we connect, right, with these values or local values, and then how can we come?
Can you use the local values to create a regional identity? Is my question.
Yeah. So everything has been connected, right? Regional values, even South Asia, Southeast Asia, or different regions around the country, and it's like a spider web, right? Everything, the web completeness, the holistic approach of dealing with this crisis is all we need to think about it. All small strand of the web spiders. Just imagine this whole world is a big tree, and that all the branches is like a different countries, and the big toss is like and then the ground it's all need to be connected. Just dealing with the one branch and leaving the another branch, the tree will not sustain. In the spider webs, if you do not really have an intact of the strand of the spiders, the whole spider web is destroyed. We are sharing the same globe. We are sharing the earth. How can we move ahead by ignoring the big contributors or big big chunk of people or big chunk of people who have contributed for sustaining the whole world? The research has already shown, even the IPCC have already acknowledged, even IPCC have already dealt with the local communities and indigenous people platform. We have already had the agreement of coming up. Actually, if not COVID was there, we will be already having another kind of reports and inserting even that one. All these strands are connected. So every strand is very, very important, and every strand need to be respected. It need to be dealt with very carefully with the local values and local system and local knowledge. And now we are thinking about global issues and dealing with a local solution. But how the local solution will be possible without understanding the local values? How would you solve the problems in the being in the capital city and dealing the problem of the people on the ground? And that is what I'm talking about. If you want to deal with the local crisis, local situation, it's not possible to just being on the table in the corner of the room. So that is why it is important to be interconnected. That values, whether it's a regional in South Asia or Southeast Asia or Latin America, Africa, North America. No, we are actually, I have been connecting. I'm co-chairing the 7 region representatives, and also my co-chair is a government representative from the 7 region. So one of the main reason is for 3 functions of the platform, that is knowledge, capacity building, and climate change policies and action. So one of the 3 functions of this one is like how is the knowledge, the science knowledge, as well as the knowledge of the indigenous peoples and the local practices. How we can exchange, discourse that has been really contributing for the sustainability of the natural resources. In fact, that has contributed for climate change adaptation and mitigation. And how we build a capacity on that knowledge, not the only capacity of indigenous people, but also the policymakers, lawmakers, also the negotiators, state parties, for them to internalize. Because so far, because our education system has created our mind in such a way that local values, indigenous knowledge is not important. Oh, they are lousy. Oh, they know nothing. They have not even graduated. They have not finished their school. This kind of our attitude, this kind of our feeling we are missing a big opportunity of continuation of these traditional values that in fact contributed for biodiversity and ecosystem to the future generation. We are losing. I just would like to highlight one very recent report of the RRI, the Right Resource Initiative. Actually, it just been published. I was just sharing yesterday also one of their events. They did a study in 42 countries. The 42 countries covering half of the world lands. They come up with a report that 110 billion tons of above ground carbon stock in 3.15 billion hectares of land claimed by indigenous people and local communities. Just imagine that, the amount. The cost of the exclusionary protected area has been $4.3 to $5.1 trillion. That's what we have been doing now. We have been promoting conservation. We have been trying to have a more national park, more biodiversity reserve, but that costs almost $5.1 trillion. But cost of recognizing the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities that have been contributing for generations over this area is less than $30 billion. So now we have a choice. What we want to do? We would like to continue the business as usual, model of conservation, continue kind of technical kind of, process of solution, or we recognize the role and contribution of indigenous peoples and local communities and protect the fragile ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Prasanth.
That has been the deal of the Green Deal, as you have mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much. I definitely want to talk to you about some of these issues at another point. I just want to kind of move our agenda forward. We have about 15 minutes. I want to keep 2-3 minutes for myself in the very end, but I want to go back to at least all the other 3 speakers. So first, I'm going to go back to Chimi very quickly. I think you talked a lot about, and very interesting points you made about the kind of rate of return of local projects versus banking and some of those more practical issues about thinking about investment and development. And I'm going to pose a question that I've got from the audience, and what they're saying is, how can the Green Deal for the Himalayan region be scaled considering the challenges of connectivity and topography? So that's a very practical question, but I want to again come back to you on the question of the question that you raised around the banking and what kind of financing instruments are needed. So if you could very quickly address the question of connectivity as also financing instruments. I'm going to give you 3 minutes.
Thank you, Vikramji. So going back to the question on the Green Deal and trying to involve banks, and then also looking at how we may be able to strengthen ourselves as a region and the instruments. In Bhutan, for instance, what we have been trying to do in the recent months, not even very long time ago, is trying to look at green financing more seriously than ever before. And it's chiefly because of the fact that resources are decreasing everywhere. And predominantly, we have been a donor-funded country where a lot of our projects and initiatives have been funded by kind patrons and donor agencies. But now we'll have to, and then this is again similar for the region. We have to be able to strengthen our own resources. So for that, we are looking at investments by individuals and the private sector. The involvement of the private sector is quite critical. And quite often we talk about, when we talk about climate change and in the green sector, we believe that there will be continuous flow of donor money for all times to come. And whether it's for research or whether it's for projects. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that with this COVID situation and global pandemic, things will not be normal. And it's so more than ever, we'll have to look at internal resources of private sector and individuals, and we'll have to weigh the greenness of a project, so to speak. And to give a particular example, for instance, when I am buying a car, if I go to the bank right now and ask for loan to buy a petrol car, no questions asked, I'll get it, because they have this determined formula, they have the determined EMI system. But if I'm going to buy a EV car, electric vehicle, which is slightly more expensive, they will have to have 5 meetings, even though knowing the fact that there is a direct benefit to the environment. So private, and then this is my own investment. So private sector investments to achieve environmental goals. And then also home constructions and in construction technology. And in our context, and particularly in Bhutan, we are seeing lots of constructions and private sector development. So there we can make a mark by having a green criteria and selecting projects based on that.
Okay, Jimmy, thanks so much. Thanks for that intervention. Sorry, I'm having to, there's a lot of interest in the panel and I'm getting questions, so I'm kind of having to navigate that. I want to go back to Tashiji. Tashiji, I have received a question which is a little bit structured around the kind of geopolitics of the region, and particularly, you know, we have audience here who are concerned about Chinese intentions, as they call it, sure, in that question. I want to understand, you know, how can we build some of these regional and transboundary processes that could, in some sense, also provide a platform for addressing some of the security and geopolitical concerns? Is that even possible?
Vikramji, this is a big question. I think we will all understand. But having said that, yes, geopolitics, we have been working around as an intergovernmental organization in ECMOT. We have been dealing this day in and day out. So we have a very good experience. So that will remain. I think geopolitics will remain as it is, but we have to navigate our pathways. So the main thing is, see, we have learned a very good lessons from COVID-19. I think it doesn't respect political boundaries, right? And the climate change, the impact of climate change, you cannot escape, you know, whether you are a big country or a small country. So these are, I think, we feel that science can really combine us together. I think that's why as a ECMOT, we really invest quite a lot in knowledge generation. If we come out with a very firm and good science, probably around science to address those, you know, major issues, probably this could be a very good pathway. We can also learn quite a lot from, we see, Arctic Council, in the Alpine Conventions, you know, how countries have come together to address these major challenges. And as a global community, if we have to move forward to address these major challenges, I don't think we have another option. The cost of non-cooperation, I think, is too huge. So therefore, I do not have a direct answer, but I feel that there's a future and that we need to find common grounds where we can work together. And probably these common grounds, we have enough on our table before it's too late. I think the COVID pandemic has already shown. And if we do not work together, I think another pandemic will not be far. And as some of my colleagues will say that, this pandemic might find a vaccine, but there may not be a vaccine to address the climate change impacts. So therefore, I think these are issues which I think we can come together. I think we, as a stakeholder, probably will need to advocate and bring those on the table. Thank you, Vikram.
Thank you, Tashji. Santosh, I'm going to come back to you. And I think you started your intervention with kind of, the assessment and scientific assessment and scientific findings, but we also heard a lot about knowledge and other forms of knowledge in the course of the conversation. So, I mean, how do you build not just regional and local science, but also other knowledge, other ways in which knowledge is collected and captured in the region. So to the question of knowledge and research, and particularly bridging scales and bridging, what I call hybrid knowledge systems.
Yeah. So, Bikram, I think this is a very important question, and I would like to answer this from the two fronts. The first is the collaboration on the knowledge generation. And Pasangji has very nicely elaborated the importance of local knowledge, There is no doubt that there is more scientific research is required in the context of climate change in its impact, because it's a very dynamic process, The understanding we had 5 years back is now changed. But what is very important is that to appreciate the local knowledge and community knowledge, which Pasangji has already taught, so I don't need to go into that detail, but there is a very clear gap between the community knowledge and scientific knowledge, and the exchange between the knowledge exchange between the two groups. My point is that we need to appreciate the local and community knowledge. We need to recognize this knowledge which has evolved long before the scientific knowledge was developed. See, the history of scientific knowledge, you can go back to the 1000, 2000, but this local knowledge, the indigenous knowledge that we had is time, very, very long time, And the second aspect equally important is the slow uptake of the new scientific generated, the knowledge by the researchers. And there is a very slow uptake of those knowledge when it is implemented at the ground level. So from the both fronts, I think it's very important that a two-way flow of information and knowledge between scientific and local communities. I think that is very important. And we also need to make sure that the local knowledge is incorporated into science policy while making the scientific knowledge accessible to local community. My last point, Vikram, is that I think Arpana has already indicated. I would just like to reiterate the need of regional cooperation among the countries. At the vertical scale, you see that the nations in the upstream regions, nations in the downstream regions, they need to collaborate, mostly on the reducing the floods and disasters, and to develop the cross-border early warning systems, for example. But also important is the horizontal landscape collaborations, which Tashiji has already indicated, the landscape level, and then the cross-learning of best practices, sharing data and information, and exchange of knowledge. I just like to give two examples so that our organization, ICIMOD, is working on this regional collaboration. The Upper Basin Indus Network among China, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, which is working for a very long time on the collaborations on different fronts, not only science, but also the implementation. And the second is the newly developed KOSI Disaster Risk Reduction Knowledge Hub among China, Nepal, and India. I think we can learn from so many other the knowledge hub or regional platforms which have been working on these directions. And I'll stop here. Thank you, Vikram.
Okay, thank you very much, Santosh. So I have now 4 minutes to try and kind of capture this really, really rich conversation. So I'm going to talk. I mean, obviously, I don't want to repeat what has already been said, but I mean, for me, let me start with the issue of knowledge. I think the issue of knowledge came quite a lot, both the kind of regional research knowledge, indigenous community knowledge, but also creating platforms for knowledge exchange. So I think that really the knowledge theme came up very strongly for me, and I think that is something that we need to think about. And how do you bridge scales and types of knowledge and create platforms where the knowledges can be shared. Obviously, the issue of institutions and regional institutions, I think obviously also came up in Aparna's presentation, but otherwise largely and also quite importantly in response to disasters and early warning systems. And I think that also links to the knowledge issues, like how do you share knowledge about potential disasters and early warning systems, but it also requires us to think about regional institutions for doing that, who have some sorts of mandates. And we didn't get into the regional institutions question really deeply, but I think it's something that we need to pick up, Aparna, as we go forward, because we've talked about regional knowledge institutions, but what are regional policy and political institutions and their status, right? So that was, to me, the second question that I think we should think about. I do think that the conversation around the new Green Deal was quite interesting, and it's clear that we can't really imagine a new Green Deal which is not perhaps some of the development needs that don't have such high rates of return, and really as international flows taper, how do we find the resources to invest in smaller projects, in local needs and local projects, and the role of banking and private sector and instruments is again something that we need to continue to think about and pick up on. So yeah, I mean, I have many other thoughts. I'm also a part-time resident of the Himalayan region, so I really relate to some of the really place-based questions and issues that Tashiji raised around local livelihoods and supporting specific alternative livelihood generation activities, whether it's the big cardamom or whether it's the yak network, but just finding ways to, I always think about that, finding ways to keep the youth interested and invested in the region. Increasingly, the literacy rates are very high, and this youth can really bring in a lot of development opportunities to the region, but we really need to find the ways to engage in that. So that question of livelihoods and not just, I don't want to call them traditional livelihood, but just like building on livelihoods, allowing for livelihood transition, but thinking about livelihoods really seriously, I think was probably my last takeaway. So with that, I really deeply from the bottom of my heart want to thank all of you, and so thank you so much for participating in this. The Himalayan region is certainly my favorite region in the world, and so yeah, so very happy to be part of a conversation on that. So with that, thank you so much. Stay connected, and hope to see you soon post-COVID in Delhi or one of our events. That's all from me. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you, Vikram. It's nice to get connected. Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you.